Hey, Peter.
Hey, good morning, David. How are you today?
I'm good. Welcome back to Call Me Data.
Welcome back. Another week has gone by. I don't know where it
Yeah.
goes. And yet we have
Yes.
another shirt.
Yes. Yes. Another shirt. More fish. More tropical
Is now
motif.
is there a meaning behind this one like there was last week? Or this is just a
No,
very
there's no good
cool
story
shirt and
behind
why?
this one. No good story. It's just sort of a retro futuristic Art Deco rendering of marine life, I guess.
Oh,
So,
I love it. You went with
uh,
that. I went the slightly professorial look today.
I like it. I like
Yeah,
it. Well, I am
make it.
continuing the, made in Hawaii trend. So, trying to support the Hawaiian manufacturers of shirts. Um,
I think I'm going to go out and
so,
buy a stock in one of those companies.
There you go. So look, I've been looking forward to this because I feel like we have unfinished business from last week. We were talking about agentic computing and what AI agents really are, and we
Yep,
had so much to talk about that here we are back again. So, should we
I know.
recap what we talked about last week? And you want to recap like what are agents for anyone who didn't join us last week and why we thought they're so interesting?
Yeah, no, let's recap that. And I think also, again, we put it out there. If there are questions, obviously, please put them in the chat so we can follow through with them. We value your feedback. We think that's important to getting better. So if you have anything, please, online, offline, on LinkedIn, whatever it may be, carry a pigeon. I don't care. Just send us any feedback or, even things or topics that you think might be worth addressing for us. But yeah, just a quick 1 minute recap of last week. And we had a long discussion about agents and their applicability and how they provide, so I think, some level of flexibility having these autonomous pieces of software, which, and the idea of an agent, again, reiterate, have been around for decades. It's not a new concept per se. What makes this class or this implementation, I don't know how you want to use it, this versions of it, are these are now fully, I think, proactive pieces of software that can act autonomously on their own and make decisions separate from humans. And they are goal oriented, not reactive to an input. Whereas our language models today are reactive to an input. These agents, these generative AI agents or these artificial intelligence agents, can in fact act by themselves. They can go do a task. They can complete that task. They can reason and they can complete it. And some of the um, examples that we use were the classic example about I got to go book a trip, complex trip. So an agent goes and books the flights, an agent goes and books the hotels. Then it comes back to you with a full blown itinerary. So, we see these tools as the next generation of making artificial intelligence extraordinarily powerful and applicable to businesses, and really much different than what's I think been available up until fairly recently, where again you're using these powerful models, for composing text, creating images, whatever it may be. But these are now really taking it to the next level and having software do something by itself, which opens up a whole host of ethical and compliance and regulatory questions, which we did not discuss last week.
Yeah, and I think it's like a lot of things in this space. This has caught a lot of attention, and you're hearing agent this and agent that, and agents are everywhere. And I think based on the description that we believe is the right one, they're not really as widespread yet as some organizations might have you believe, right? I mean, there's a lot of
Correct.
marketing out there where people say that they have an agent, but what they're describing really doesn't meet our definition of a true agent.
Correct. And I think most of, you and I said it last week, it's the hype it usually gets ahead of the reality. And right now, everything you read, pick up, every, I don't know, newspaper, all the trade magazines, whether it's Harvard Business Review or McKinsey, it's, the focus is on agents. They're not there yet. Certainly not the way I think they will be or the way we're thinking about them. Some companies are starting to use them in a limited capacity, but through agent level, agent capabilities, I think is still a bit of ways. When you say
Yeah,
that,
I agree. And, just because something is a chatbot is not necessarily an agent. A multi step onboarding workflow or onboarding assistant is not necessarily an agent. Now, those are all things
right,
that could be someday enabled by agents. But I think, like you, very, very bullish that agents are really representing sort of a step forward in the way that we build software and the way that software interacts with
right,
people. And to your point,
right,
also interacts with the business environment, right? Because
right,
you mentioned that agents can be triggered by events, not necessarily a user asking a question or writing a prompt, they could be triggered by some other event that they are able to detect,
Right.
and they could take action on that event. And I want to go back to your comment also about them being goal seeking. Goal seeking. I think that's a very, very important distinction, because not only are they goal seeking, that implies, and we should be explicit about it, they are not following a deterministic path to get to that goal.
Right.
Right? You have not told them ahead of time, and this
Right.
is how you solve the goal. They are reasoning, and I'll be careful not to say exactly thinking, because I'm not sure what qualifies as thinking anymore, but they are using reasoning. They are coming up with a plan.
Right.
They are evaluating the goal that you've given them. They are evaluating the tools at their disposal, and they're
Right.
coming up with a multi-step plan to reach the goal. And that
Right.
multi-step plan may involve assigning work to sub-agents, to other agents, to do parts of that task, and they
Right.
coordinate, and they basically decide when they've completed the task.
Right. Right. Exactly. And I think that's really critical the way you described it. And but you said something that I think is, which will hopefully start leading us into the next part of the discussion, is coordination, sharing of
Yeah.
information,
Yes.
which is, and I also want to lead, I want to make clear that most agents or agents are and can and should, at many steps of the process, have the ability to interact with humans to make sure that they are doing something that they should be doing and not something else. And at this point, not going off on their own and making decisions to do things that we don't want them to do. But you brought up a very important point, and I think this is where we're going to go at least the beginning of this week, and something we wanted to go on a lot deeper, was in fact in a real world, ultimately, it's fast forward out 6, 12, 18 months when you have, I think, agents operating semi-independently. They are coordinating, they're working on a problem together, so they need to coordinate information back and forth. And right now, there's not a real clear, easy way to do that. But there is a proposal out there. I shouldn't say proposal. I don't want to call it a standard quite yet because it's not really a standard yet. Um, but something called Model Context Protocol, MCP. I think it's what's out there. And kind of
Which,
want to describe that.
let's be
Oh, go
clear,
ahead. Sorry.
that's an absolute tragedy of a name, because it's one of
Yeah.
the most interesting ideas. It's a useful idea, and it's really powerful, and it has the most obscure, irrelevant name. Whoever at Anthropic named it, come see me after class. I love your work. I hate your name. Right? It's a terrible name.
It is.
And I feel so strongly about that, because I think it's a brilliant concept, and it really opens up. It was something that's very much needed, which was, how can we start to maybe standardize the way that agents find and use tools, because it's all
Right.
about agents using tools, and it's an important concept, and we're going to talk about it. But it's a tragedy that the name is so non-descriptive of what it really does.
Yeah, typical engineer speak.
Yep.
Acronym. Let me come up with an archaic acronym that's, befuddles everybody except for the engineer who came up with it and actually truly understands what it does. So, yeah, no, bad name. Marketing people were clearly not involved. I'm sure they would have named it something other than MCP and
But on the
something a
plus
little
side,
more.
I think we sound smart. Every time you say MCP, you get 2 extra IQ points. So,
Yeah, we need all the help we can get at our age. Sound is good. I like sound. We sound really great.
yeah.
Not so sure sometimes. No, I'm kidding. But
So,
MCPs, go ahead. No, go ahead. I'm
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
So let me maybe tee it up, and then you can dive into like what MCPs are, and because
Yeah.
we talked last week, I gave a very basic example. I was talking about some experimentation I had done a few weeks
Right.
ago, with Claude's computer use model, and that was like pre-MCP. It was one of the ways that agents could start to work, and again, the idea is an agent uses a tool to do a task, and the tools that they use are not always going to be predefined. It's going to, that master
Right.
agent is going to pick different specialized agents to do different things based on what the task is. And we'll say the early days, as in a couple of months ago, the early days of agentic computing, the way a lot of it worked was literally an agent or the tool you're working with would take a screenshot of a browser, would
Right.
analyze the browser, would try to figure out what application you had open in the browser, and would basically say, okay, I am going to put this value in this text field. I'm going to click this date on this calendar drop down, and I'm going to press this button, for example, right? And so
Right.
the tools, it didn't really have tools except that it could sort of discover web browser capabilities and websites that you'd bookmarked and tools that you had open. But
Right.
that was very, first of all, it was very inefficient because
Very.
it was working through a web browser and it was
Right.
going through this process of taking screenshots, using a large language model to interpret the screenshot, and then
Right.
decide what to do next. And it was just very slow. But it was
Right.
also very limited in functionality.
Right.
Agents later started to evolve into, okay, you had specialized agents that maybe knew an API. They knew how to communicate directly with the Expedia backend for travel planning, or with
Right.
American Airlines, or with Hertz rental cars. But and those were a lot faster and they could do more, but you had to have a bunch of specialized agents, and
Right.
they were very dependent upon knowing and keeping up to date with the APIs that were provided by
Right.
these tools. And so it was better, and APIs are the way the world works in some ways, but it wasn't
Mhm.
good enough.
Right.
So this is where MCP comes in, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I want to paint the picture here, and I think it's important. Like, if you look at today how a lot of functionality works with a language model, you're working with a model. You're not working with multiple models. You're working with OpenAI, and that's it. And you're providing only functionality for that single API into that model. Generally speaking, you're not going from one model to another model to another model. You normally don't need to, so you're working on one. Now, and I want a little bit of background information here, I think is also important. When you interact with a model, there is something called a context window. So you might hear it speak occasionally about tokens. Tokens, and this is how models actually process information. But there's this concept of a context window. Now, a context window, if you want to think about it, is really short-term memory. At the end of the day, it's really, so you leave that session, that context goes away. Now, so just imagine a world where I'm dealing with multiple models, and I go from model A, which provides, say, some specific function and it does it very well. And now I go to model B to do another part of that same workflow process. Now, model B knows absolutely nothing about model A and what model A actually did. There's nothing about that. In order for model B to figure it out, I have to pass that information in. So I'm taking out the context window, the context from the first model, and now I'm moving it into model B. Now, that's wildly efficient. That works in small projects, but at scale, that becomes very inefficient. And now take that to the next level where I have or agents operating independently, and they need that context of where I'm at during this workflow in order to function properly. They need a way of getting that context. Now, how do you do that? You need a way of basically sharing this global memory. You need a way of passing this context around from application to application in order for the applications or these agents to operate efficiently. Now, this is where MCP comes in. It's an interface layer that sits on top of all these agents and processes, and that context is passed from agent to agent to agent and updated accordingly by the model, and then subsequently passed to the next agent to continue on its journey or whatever problem it's trying to solve. That's one part of it. Think about the other part of it too.
Super
It's
cool.
is a security layer. At the end of the day, you're providing security to all your models. Like, what can get passed in, what cannot get passed in, what kind of data can go here, what person can operate on what agent, which one can use this, can use that. You don't want everybody operating on HR agents. You want to restrict some people, so you're passing in a security context with that as well.
Yeah.
And then you want maybe a registration function. So an agent can register in this global namespace, so to speak, this interface layer to say, hey, I'm available and these are the functions that I provide. Because think about it realistically, you're going to have agents developed by hundreds of vendors. And unlike APIs today, where as a developer, I have to call every single API and know every API from every vendor to coordinate back and forth, that kind of removes that capability.
Right.
Yep.
So this idea that we talked about in the very beginning of, a planning agent coming up with a plan and assigning tasks to different agents. And when we talked about the travel example last week, the reason it was a good example is because it did
Right.
require inter-agent communication. So model
Right.
context protocol is a way that this inter-agent communication can happen, right?
Right, right, exactly. So, and they don't have to pass around all this information. It resides in a global memory space, an abstract memory space. Let's think of it that way,
Right.
where I'm updating this context for this person, and now the next agent comes along And whatever agent's coordinating this workflow amongst agents, it will pick up that context, and the next agent will grab it and it will use it, and it will go on its merry way, update whatever it's got to do, update the context, go to the next one. So now,
Here's the
as
cool
I'm
thing.
sorry, yeah,
If you and I are having, and the cool thing about it to me is, you and I are having a conversation, right? We both speak English. We have a conversation in English. We understand each other. We don't actually have to specify up front the structure of our sentences and how we're going to have a conversation and how I'm going to tell
right,
you that I'm done speaking, etc. Right? That's
right,
we are dynamically interpreting each other's intent and having a conversation, right? Computer systems prior to MCP, they don't work that way, right? The APIs, the application program interface, means exact conversation that two pieces of computer code are going to have with each other, right? And it says, hey, if you want to ask me the question, you're going to make this call with these parameters, and here's how I'm going to return my parameters, and it's very predefined. What I like about Model
right,
Context Protocol is it's using truly the power of large language models to interpret spoken language
right,
or natural language to allow passing of information through this shared memory, through context, without predefining which agents are going to communicate what things to which other agents, which
right.
is so different than the way we've ever built software before.
No, it's radically different because we've always been, you always had to adhere to a hard, well-defined set of standards, and now you're moving away from that. You're
Yeah.
dealing with human language, and I think this is one of the things about language models that most people I don't think fully appreciate is it's really changing the human computer interface. It's changing how we interact with these devices dramatically. And in the past, where things had to be very crystal clear about how you put information in, how you took information out, how you called other applications, how you pass it on, highly structured. And now you're moving away, you're just moving towards what's becoming the human language and all its nuances. And for that matter, David and I can speak completely different language, yet in many ways we can still communicate. We'll be able to communicate in these cases because it'll translate on the fly. So there's all sorts of things that open up with language models. And this change, this fundamental change in how we interact with computers.
And it is hard to, first of all, I don't want to overstate it by saying, look, this is not fully implemented and fully realized yet. A lot of this is early days.
Right,
There is no standard for this, although I will note that MCP was originally proposed by Anthropic, and it has recently been endorsed by OpenAI. And
right,
so, in today's fast-moving AI world, that's as close as you can get to a de facto standard right now. Right, two of the
right,
large research groups and model developers have agreed that MCP is the way forward. So I do expect this to become
right.
a standard at least for a while.
No, I think so too. It's very much looking that way, and I'm like you. I'm usually standards don't evolve quite that fast. Usually it's over, you got governing bodies and this and that, and it could take literally years to come up with a set of standards. But I do think in this case, given the speed of what market's moving and the changes in some of these models, and it's operating at a different level than it's ever operated before. So I do think look, agents are coming, and I think you're right. You don't, look, it's not tomorrow, but it's not far after that. But having these semi-autonomous pieces of software that theoretically are going to be developed by hundreds of vendors, you need a way of talking to each other if you want to get onboarded and used fairly quickly.
Right. And when you say agents are coming, that's a great point. They really are coming in the sense that there are toolkits out there today, a lot of them actually, that allow you to
Yeah.
build agentic solutions. So the
Right.
technology exists. What is not there yet, but I think will be in a matter of months, is a couple of things. It's scalability, it's reliability, it's the controllability that allows you to really put this into an industrial setting. So there is some growth and
Right.
maturation needed before these are ready for industrial strength use, but we know enough to say already it works. Like, this
Right.
is real. Yeah.
Well, it's yeah, no, absolutely, it's very real. And I think from when I started and really started engaging on this technology, 6 months ago, 7 months ago, 9 months ago, when we talked about it over a little over a year ago, it's amazing to me how fast things have come along. I mean, this is moving truly at light speed, which I think and maybe we talk a bit more about this, but the follow-on conversation is the disruption it's going to cause
Yeah.
in organizations, I think is going to be, if not handled properly, quite dramatic.
Yeah. So let's. I agree with what you said too. That is, it's hard to overstate how much this will impact not just the way engineering nerds like us build software, the way that
Right.
actual business processes get automated and the way companies run. It's a far-reaching impact.
Right.
Before we jump into that, let's go back to something you
Yeah.
said, which is I think is super interesting. You mentioned tools. Here's my poor analogy, right? Imagine if I were a service mechanic going out and servicing high tech devices,
Right.
and in the morning before I knew what problems I had to tackle that day, I had to pick which tools to load into my service truck. I had limited amount of space, and I just have to go through this warehouse full
Right.
of tools and say, I'm going to take these 30 tools with me. Now,
Right.
if I get out in the field and those aren't the right 30 tools, I'm clearly not the right service person for the job and I can't do the work. What agentic is doing through MCP is the idea that agents can go to a tool catalog of sorts dynamically after they've been given a task, and they can browse through available tools, and they
Right.
can use information including what the tool does, how much it costs to use, how fast it is, how it's been rated by previous users of the tools, etc. They can use this information to make a dynamic decision on which tool to use for this next step that they're going to perform, this next task.
Yep.
And traditional software is more like the service guy who has to leave the depot with a predetermined set of tools. And once you're
Right.
launched into production, you can't change your tools. You're out there and you've got what you've got.
Right.
And with MCP, agents are more like the person who says, "Oh, here's what I have to do. Let me see what tools are available, and then I'll pick the one I think I want to use."
And
That's,
adjust on the
again,
fly.
very big. That's a big deal.
It's a big shift in how we've been doing things for the last 50 years, 60 years. It's a dramatic shift. And the thing is, it could shift on the fly. It encounters issues that wouldn't have encountered in the past, and it can make a shift, and it can adjust accordingly because of that. And that's not something you were able to easily do in the past. You had to think of every particular avenue you're going to go down and code for it, or make all this. You had to think about things in a very thorough fashion. So yeah, it changes things quite a bit.
A
Um,
lot. Now, that could be good or bad, right? Like the powerful scenario is you've got an agent that's looking for a tool that does something, and we'll stick with our travel analogy. Maybe it's looking for a tool that helps book flights, and last time it did a similar task, it didn't have this tool. Today it says, oh, there's a new tool that is actually
right.
has a special ability to book multi-stop, multi-city flights. That's perfect. I
Right.
really want to use that one. That's There could be a huge advantage in that because without me as the process owner having to reconfigure or reprogram anything, my agent is now smarter by virtue of picking a different tool and using it more effectively than it was yesterday when I ran it.
Right.
I see that as a big advantage. But there's a dark side to that too, which is my agent might behave differently today than it did yesterday.
Well, and I think that's important, and you're absolutely correct. And in likelihood, it's going to interact. Look, at some point, they evolve, self-learn, so that presumably they're doing the same thing as a human would. But you're right, though. I mean, you don't know necessarily uh, if it's going to do the same thing every single day. And that's right now. It might not. Subtle changes in the inputs can drive maybe big output changes. We don't unless it's coded around it. But yeah, I mean, even language models today, if small subtle changes in the input will change how the model decides the next token, and the
Right.
output can be dramatically different. Um,
But I don't want to catastrophize that either because I think that it's easy for people to look at that, to take what you just said and think that
right.
what you're saying is, oh, they're not reliable, you shouldn't trust them, you can't use them.
You're
And
right.
yet we have companies full of human beings who do the exact same thing, right? There's very little
Yes.
guarantee that humans behave absolutely consistently day over day, week over week.
Well, you bring up an excellent point. I mean, we make mistakes all the time. We look at things differently. We have a bad day. We woke up on the wrong side of bed this morning. Something happens. Agents at least don't have those problems. But in reality, ultimately, they will perform at a much higher level, I think, than humans will for a lot of tasks. Not to replace humans, but they'll certainly a lot of these drudgery type tasks where you don't necessarily need a person doing it. You can enable the individual to do other things that are much more powerful, much more business focused. And that's how I always like to think about this. It's not to say, and we're clear about this. Anytime you go through an upheaval and change, there are going to be people that are going to be impacted, for good and for bad. It's just a matter of it's a transitionary period. It doesn't stay that way forever, but it does happen. But net
Agents
net,
agents do something else that humans do, and maybe agents will do it more reliably than humans, which is they check their work and they self-correct, or they can, right? They
yes,
using the principles that we've talked about previously in large reasoning models or reasoning models,
right,
agents can evaluate whether the solution they proposed or the action they want to take, etc. They can evaluate whether that's actually correct, and
right,
if not, they can redo the task until they get it right. So
right, right,
that's
right, exactly.
also a important factor.
Absolutely. And there's something I was thinking as we're speaking about all this in a somewhat theoretical level.
Yeah.
It's, and I want to clarify for those maybe listening to like what really is an agent at the end of the day. And like I like to touch and feel things and I like to know that there's an agent. Like, how do you define an agent? And we talk about what the functions of an agent are. What an agent really is, it could be another language model that maybe isn't fine tuned or even custom tuned for a very specific function, or maybe it's been enabled to access via API a whole number of systems, and now it's sitting there waiting for input, and it can reason through a request that comes into it, but it's just maybe designed, or it's trained, I should say, is probably a better way to handle a smaller part of the process, and it's going to interact with other language models and see input from other language models to complete a small part of the workflow. That effectively is an agent, if you had to describe it in some way.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great description of an agent, and it's not too different than thinking about it like it's an intern or a new hire,
Right.
which is you're going to give them a limited scope of work. They're going to interact with other people, but they're
Right.
going to do real work for you. And over time, they probably get a little bit better at what they're doing. And yeah,
Right, exactly. And you might, like I said, you might have tuned them for a very specific function. Maybe it requires some hyper specialized domain capabilities, and you consequently take one of these language models and you fine tune it for that specific function. Maybe you're building, I don't know, Ferrari engines, and there's a specific function that needs to be, you have all this domain information that is necessary for it to function properly. And you might train the model with that information so that it's, again, hyper specialized. It does its function. It does it well. It takes directions via language, and it operates on, whatever it has to operate on, and returns a, yeah, we're done. Go to the next part of the process.
right. And we can talk about some of the safeguards, but like as we're talking about this and as we're introducing the topic, of course, I was thinking again about the movie War Games and how the
Yep.
runaway computer was proposing that a game of nuclear thermonuclear war might not be a game and might be a real exercise, and
Right.
so it's important to remember to put this into perspective that first of all these agents at the end of the day they are usually fairly specialized. They're
Yes.
not a super intelligence. They're simply a large language model that's been trained and optimized to do certain types of tasks, which is very different than being a super intelligence that can outrun
Right.
and outwit a human at every step of the way. And also, they are only able to do what they can do through the tools they use.
Right.
Tools that they are either pre-configured to use or tools they discover through model context protocol. But we're in control of which model
Right.
directories they look at. We can set policies about what kinds of tools they're allowed to use. We can
Right.
set policies about how they make decisions in which tools to use, etc. And then, as
Right.
you mentioned,
Exactly.
we also can insert humans in the loop so
Right.
that if we want them to not actually do something, if we want them to come up with a plan and a proposal but not act on it, we can have a human in the loop who reviews it and says, okay, this is
Right.
fine, proceed, or no, don't do
Right.
that.
Right.
So,
Right. Right. And I think you're spot on. Whatever obviously, I think you said. And I think the important part, one of the important parts is look, and look. This is maybe we're segueing into other stuff now, but
yeah,
the part about AI, which is incredibly powerful, I think fearful to some people, is having software act independently of a human. And I don't, again, I think we're ways away from that. I mean, AI in its current form and capabilities is not going to replace a human anytime soon. I don't think, at least. Contrary to what the media says, I think that's incredibly wrong. There are massive limitations to the current models and how they're trained and operate and everything else. They're
Yeah.
great at predicting the next token, but they're not going to replace humans. Now, having humans in the loop on all of this, I think, is very important. And also gives humans still to maintain some level or some sense of control over what it is they're in charge of. We're not fully losing control and say, oh, the machine just did it. I have no idea. And therefore, it's
Right.
no longer my fault anymore.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's we can't yet blame the computer for everything. Although we've been trying to do that for 50 years.
Nah, not happening yet.
No, no, but I think it's a good point. The agents, at least as they're currently designed, aren't even intended to replace people as much as to offload
Right,
certain types of tasks and certain portions of our work onto agents.
right, right,
Yeah,
right.
big
No,
distinction.
huge distinction. I think we want to, I kind of like to hammer it home because there's so much out there in the media that I see on a regular basis. You and I'm just constantly inundated with stuff. And since we're in this business, we're hyper aware of what's getting said out there. But, between the podcasts and, what's on the daily news and everything else, I think, people would think, oh my God, we're going to be taken over by a Terminator next week. And it's clearly not the case, not even close to being the case. And we're decades away from that level of capability. Yet you see that in the news constantly. And agents are a natural extension of that because you get that fear factor if you're working in an organization. And all of a sudden you have these very smart pieces of software that are acting on your behalf and you feel like you lost control over it. And that drives a whole bunch of other conversations. What kind of controls, compliance, regulatory controls do you put in place before you start embarking on this journey to control some of these things?
And the English language nerd in me wonders if maybe the term agent, while semantically very very correct, isn't also saddled with some unfortunate connotations because I think there's a little bit of a negative connotation to the word agent. You think of spies
Yes.
and foreign agents, and you think of science fiction, and yes, agentic computing is the perfect definition of what we're talking about, but it has a little bit of a frightening connotation to it. I sometimes wish we'd called it an assistant instead of an agent, because assistant sounds more helpful, right? Like, I know it's
Right.
a small distinction, but you raise a good point. That we're not at the place where anyone should be afraid of agents yet. Not afraid of them on the global societal damage level, and not afraid of them that my job is going to be replaced by an agent. But
Right.
we were talking earlier today and about some recent announcements made by various organizations in the news that they really are, companies really are, aggressively looking to build and deploy agents. Like, this is not, yeah, as much as I said they're not fully ready for industrial use, it's also not a thing that people, it's not a research project. Like, people are actually working on this today and committed to doing this.
Right, right. No, I think you're right, and I think organizations like humans, they will start with some smaller projects, and they'll start still gather some momentum behind them as they understand the capabilities behind agents and some of these models and how they interact with their systems, and you will see them, I think, proliferate over time. But
Yeah.
it does. Look, never mind the ethical concerns, and we can go down that a rabbit hole and all the other issues that come up. But I think first and foremost, and you and I have been saying this for a very long time, the people aspect of deploying some of this stuff and how your employees actually deal with it and how to respond to it and how to react to it. And I think there's a lot to be learned in doing it right and positioning it as tools that are going to augment you, but not yet replace you, because I do think it can create, it will create for a lot of organizations massive internal friction
Yeah.
and wind up doing more good than bad. I'm sorry, more bad than good.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think in the earlier days of automation and digitization, we had this very binary sense of how people spent their time. There was either you were spending your time on thinking and value creating activities, or you're spending your time on manual repetitive activities, and there was sort of a binary divide between, okay, these are things that are
Right,
just rote activities that can be fully automated, these are the things that humans have to do. What
Right.
agentic is doing is sort of fitting in the middle and blurring those distinctions a little bit and saying, hey,
Hmm. Right.
there are types of work that are just pure automation. That's not what agentic is good for if it's really literally just automate the same repetitive task over and over, right? We have ways of
Right.
doing that. At the other end of the spectrum, there's real thinking and creating and judgment calls that are what humans are good at. We're not taking that away from humans, but there is a middle ground of things that are less predictable and less rigid than traditional automation tasks, but still don't require full human ingenuity.
Right.
And this is where agentic fits in, isn't it?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
sort of
No.
broadens the scope of what you can have digital assistance with doing.
Yes, but that's today. And I think we know over time as the technology evolves rapidly, you know, it's going to go up the food chain. It always does. But I think it's important. Look, with any new technology, I think there's a high level of fear factor involved. And anytime something goes wrong, even if it happens once in a million times, that's going to be the focus of, this is bad, something went wrong, because that's just human nature. You latch on to the thing that went wrong, and that is, everything is now therefore bad, even though it might have happened once every 10 million
Right.
times. Um, and we saw this with the web. We saw this with doing online transactions when it first came out way back in the 90s. Everybody was afraid. I can't do online transactions. I got to go, do it old fashioned manual way because I'm afraid.
Yep.
And you see what happens over time. People get used to it and then it becomes the norm. I think it's with any tech that seems to appear like it's magic and it works, in ways that they can. It takes a long time. It's benefit to walk down this journey hand in hand with employees and get them used to the stuff and show them how it could benefit them rather than jamming it down their throats and saying, oh, by the way, we're deploying all this stuff, which is the traditional engineer way of doing things.
Right.
But you and I have said repeatedly over and over and over and over again, this is the one technology where you can't do that. You have to embrace the people because there's so much a people aspect to it. And if you don't, you're going to make it 10 times more difficult than it needs to be when you deploy it.
Yeah. And look, I'll go on record saying I would love to have agents helping me do my job, right? Because I love parts of what I do, but there's parts of what I do that are a lot of grunt work, like planning trips and doing
Right.
some research and things like that. Now, I will never give an agent the ability to interpret the research for me, to think for me, but to actually do the research and find relevant papers and articles and extract out of them the sections that are most relevant to what I'm working on. Yes, I would love to have someone do it. The same as I would with the human assistant, right?
Right.
So,
No,
um,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And we were sharing some articles back and forth earlier today. One of the ones that caught my eye was that some of the large accounting firms, the big four in the U.S.,
Yeah.
are committed to using and developing agentic AI to do some things. Now, again, to your point, Peter, they're not saying they're going to replace X% of their workforce with agents. What they're saying is the other way. They're taking the orthogonal view, which is saying
Right.
their workforce does certain tasks, certain types of work that they think they can develop agents to help automate. So,
Right.
yes,
So
there
let me
will
ask you a
be
question.
some. Yeah, go for it.
Let me ask you a question. And I think we've spoken about this before. And I've seen this, or you've seen this, we've seen this, where they take an existing process and they attempt to automate portions of it. And then they'll take the existing process, whatever that process might be. Maybe that process has been around for 20 years or 25 years or whatever it may be. But all they're going to do is, and I've seen this with other technologies also, is automate what's already there and not stepping back and rethinking it the right way and taking a different view because now you're using a level of technology that far more powerful than anything before, and not rethinking the process and saying, well, is there a completely different way of doing this? And really optimizing it. But you're not seeing that. I feel like in some cases we're just going to have the same stuff. Now it's going to go faster, maybe a little more flexibility, but you're just still doing the same stuff. Now, what do you think is the right approach to do this?
That's interesting. I didn't see that one coming because, as you said it, I realized I am of two minds on this. So, I the first thing I would say, my initial reaction is just like with other forms of process automation, you should avoid trying to automate the existing process. You should think clearly about what the process could be and should be, fix flaws in the process, optimize the process, have a process that is well suited for the type of automation you're introducing, right? Like it's don't just slap mechanical advantage on top of an existing lever, like
Right.
redesign the machine. And I still believe that is largely true. That is true most of the time. The reason I said I'm of two minds about this is there's a however there. And the however is that because agents are what they are, because they can evaluate their own work, they can plan a task dynamically, they can select tools dynamically, they're actually far more, or they should be, far more forgiving of flaws in a process than traditional forms of automation would be. Right? So I used the example a few weeks ago when we were talking about robotic process automation that, the biggest challenge for robotic process automation, so non-agentic, just straight automation of a process. The biggest challenge was that people often didn't fully understand where humans were acting as the circuit breaker, as the overload
Right.
protection. And when something didn't happen when it should have, or didn't happen the way it should have, a human was part of that process, and they just fixed it and moved on. And yet that
Right.
wasn't like a documented feature of the process. It was just because the humans were smart. They realized something was
They
missing.
did it.
They emailed the person to get the missing document, the missing
Right.
exchange rates file or whatever they needed, and then they kept going. Right? But
Right.
that wasn't part of the official process, and so then you go and automate the process, and the process doesn't have the human checking to see if the file came in,
And it
and it
breaks.
blows up. Right. Agentic processes should be more fault tolerant. They should be more flexible to those types of things.
Right.
So it's a little bit of a conundrum because I think you can get away with not improving your process, maybe a greater likelihood of getting away with it with agentic
Right.
than with traditional automation. But your original point, I think I'm going to come down the sides of that's still not nearly as good as actually fixing and optimizing the process. That clearly is what you should do. But, you can cheat a little bit more with agentic than you can with traditional process automation, I think.
You can, and maybe it's a path forward. Maybe it's a way of doing it and getting into a better state at some point. And this is really just a way of starting it. I'm always been a big fan. I think systems and processes tend to go towards maximum entropy over time. They get more complicated and they patch the holes into things. It's like, oh, I have a hole, therefore I got to patch it, and that patch creates four of the problems. And rather than doing to me, this is a real opportunity with the tech. Uh, engaging the business and doing a rethink and doing it the right way and looking for opportunities to streamline processes that are in place and making them more efficient and much more client focused to get the most out of it and therefore to presumably make more money. Um, and this is
The, the
the
other
best opportunity for that.
the other part of it is a perfect process will never exist. So even if you do process reengineering concurrently with trying to automate that process using agentic, if you've used agentic technology, you've got a little extra inoculation against the fact that you might still have a better but flawed process,
Right.
right? Because you can't, like, I just don't believe a perfect process ever exists. There will always be unanticipated scenarios. There will always be things that you just couldn't have predicted would happen.
Right.
You're not guaranteeing that your process will never fail if it's agentic, but you're probably giving yourself a little bit of extra insurance that it's going to be slightly more flexible
Yeah.
when
Maybe.
things
Yeah. I
happen.
could. I could see that. Now, do you think businesses are? And another one of the articles that popped up this morning on uh, again, one of the larger consulting firms and how businesses are, or AI driven business transformation. There are some businesses that are truly embracing a full transformation of their business built upon artificial intelligence, large language models, agentic computing, and really looking at things very closely and rebuilding, or I say transforming their business to be more efficient, more effective, more agile with this technology. I stumped you again this
Here's what
morning.
I would here's what I would tell, if a CEO asked me what they should do. given what you said, and companies are investing in this, are committing to it. Here's the way I would position it to a leader at a company. I would say, look, it's not 100% clear how much of your business process can be enhanced and automated with agentic computing. It's not completely clear what impact AI will have precisely on your organization. What is clear is there will be an impact, and agentic computing will change your business, or does have the opportunity to change your business.
Right.
Therefore, and a lot of your competitors or companies you've never heard of that could compete with you one day, a lot of companies are out there actively working on this. And I'm not saying working on creating agentic frameworks. They're working on the application of agentic to their business. They're experimenting, they're learning, they're trying things in controlled experiments.
Right.
So my bottom line advice to that leader would be, do not sit on the sidelines too long and let these companies do the learning and the experimentation, because as the dust settles and established patterns emerge, you don't want to be too far behind to catch up and compete effectively with them, right? They may not be running full speed yet, but they're out there taking early steps. And if you're just watching, once they figure out how to go from crawling to walking to running, it's gonna take you some time to get in that race. And it may be too late if you're not keeping close to this.
There's a lot of institutional knowledge that has to be learned through the technology, and that just takes time. And you're not going to muscle your way through it in record time. It's difficult. It's complex. It impacts a lot of parts of the business. Actually, it impacts all parts of the business from the top on down. And you have to understand its capabilities and its limitations. And I think a lot of education is necessary for people to truly understand the capabilities and where it can be applied. It's not, and nor should it be, the purview of IT only. I think that is the hugest mistake you could possibly make. It really needs to be the purview of the business together with IT to build solutions. But the business really truly needs to understand the capabilities here and how to implement it in a business situation, since they're the ones that are dealing with the business, and really embrace it and get their employees to transform accordingly and use it to the maximum potential. Saw a great article in HBR and Harvard Business Review not too far back, and they did a study, and I forget where it was. It might have been one of the European companies, where they invited ChatGPT to the boardroom. And what they found was just asking ChatGPT basic questions about things drove the boardroom or the board to ask better, harder questions and get better outcomes because of it. And it tackled things that they normally would not have thought of. And I thought that was interesting, actually. Like, even it was a simple test, it wasn't, wasn't crazy, but it added a lot of value. And that was not something that was obvious to everybody quickly. Like, well, we're the board, we run the company, we are obviously, and they missed a lot of stuff compared to ask ChatGPT just to help guide the meeting.
It's very interesting, and I think your point about business ownership and leadership of these initiatives it can't overstate that. It's so critical. And going back again to some of the articles we were reading earlier and discussing, what we should point out is that in virtually all of the articles that we read, it was the business leader. It was a CEO or a C-level executive or a senior business leader who was talking about and sponsoring and leading the adoption of AI in the business. This was not driven by technology. It cannot be driven by technology. Technology absolutely has a role to play, but they're wasting their time unless the business is leading this and pulling the conversation forward.
And now think about it this way, because you're going to have a business user, and this I think where agentic computing really even further enables them to do their jobs in ways before. You're not going to go to IT to come up with, if I'm a business person and have an idea for, I don't know, a new supply, a new problem of some sort, and there's all these agents out there that are registered already and operating, I'm going to do it myself. I don't need IT to enable it anymore.
Right. Yeah, there's the whole resurgence of end user computing that this brings up as a potential scenario, and let's talk about that, man. I also wanted to throw in that I was having a conversation earlier this week, and it was about how do you get a board to really embrace and support a technology transformation initiative. And I took maybe a little bit of a contrarian view in the beginning and said, well, I'm not sure it's even the right question to ask, because if a transformation initiative is purely a technology transformation initiative, that'd be something like, I'm changing my network protocol, I'm moving data centers, I'm moving
Right.
from on-prem data centers to the cloud, like pure technology. I don't know that you really need the board to embrace it. There may be some aspects of risk and financial investment that the board needs to sign off on, but they're not really
Right.
going to be too concerned. If it's broader than that, then I would object to calling it a technology transformation, because it really should be a business transformation. It should be a
Right.
business transformation supported by technology. This falls into that category clearly,
Yes.
right?
100%.
AI is not a technology play. It is a business play supported
Right.
by some very cool technology.
Right.
But this
Right.
has got to be, this is a business initiative. This is not a technology play.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely correct. That's 100%. You and I, again, for over a year, we've been talking about this and how it is a technology. I'm sorry, it's a business play, and it always has been. And I think those that fail to realize the capabilities and the potential are the ones that are going to fall behind. It is allows you to rethink your business, and I think every aspect of it. And I think if you don't, um, you're missing out on an opportunity to set yourself up for the next century or whatever it may be for the future if you don't take the opportunity to start thinking about this now, because it's not like you're going to wake up one morning all of a sudden, well, we're going to transform a business with X, Y, and Z with AI. This is a journey. This is a multi-year journey. It's going to take a long time. You need to start thinking through this stuff early. It's going to take, and I think, and I've seen this, and you've seen this, most firms have just said, hey, IT, you go deal with this. And I
Yeah.
think nothing could be worse than, in fact, doing it. And, Dave and I both come from IT, with a lot of business experience, but handing it over to the CIO or the CTO, I think is very much the wrong answer here. It is very, very, and you just said it, it's very much a business play. The
Yep.
board, the C level, the CFO, the COO need to embrace this and truly understand it. Now you need a partner in IT to make it work and enable it. And I think what's happened in a lot of orgs, IT has gotten buried a layer or two below. It's not
Yeah.
reporting into the CEO. So they don't have that exposure to the CEO. It's going through, the chief financial officer or the COO. It's not, and that's wrong too, because you're missing out on an opportunity to learn about how this tech can transform your business in a way that, you need to know now, not a year for 2 years from now when it's too late.
Right. No, that's a great point. So, but at the same time, and this I'm not saying anything that contradicts what you're saying, but it's interesting because this also is going to drive changes in the relationship between tech and business, because of the
Good.
the dirty word of end user computing, or dirty phrase, right? So,
Yeah.
quick background. You and I both coming out of IT organizations. I don't know that everyone listening will truly understand the implications of saying end user computing and UDAs, the end user developed application. But for the last several decades, a lot of IT organizations have spent considerable effort on tracking down end user developed applications and bringing and basically killing them. The idea is
Right.
bring them under IT control. And there were a lot of very good reasons for that. Like, I'm not saying that's the wrong approach, because
Yeah.
I've seen some frightening examples of applications that were built and maintained, if they even were maintained, by end users with no oversight from IT, and yet they were performing mission critical business functions. Right? So
Right.
there's no doubt that was a very risky thing to be doing. And bringing those under IT control 100% was the right thing to do. It lowered the risk profile. It ensured that someone could look after the hardware, the software, the networking, and the power consumption requirements, etc., and keep this thing
Right.
running. But there's also a little bit of an old-fashioned flavor to this idea that IT should be running all computing, and that end users shouldn't develop applications. And I think we talked about this several times, that like it's happening already. Traders develop Python applications
All the
all the
time.
time. So agentic computing really, in some ways, is putting more power in the hands of end users, because you don't have to do API level coding. You can configure an agent without a lot of technology, without a lot,
Right.
lot of technical configuration, I should say, to perform some business tasks. So, as a As someone who spent years in IT, how do you feel about that? Like, what does this all mean to you in terms of
I've
end user
honestly been,
compute?
it's funny, I'm IT, but I'm also the worst nightmare for IT because I was always the one I was the one that drove them crazy all the time because I'm like, to me, IT was always about command, it was always about control. And and this is giving me, don't try to control what I want to do because because I remember I sat in the trading floor for a long time. So I have a heavy business background. So I understand the need to do things and do them fast. And IT is designed to do the complete opposite. It's designed to put controls and regulations instead of, security to go slow, which the business doesn't move slow, it moves really fast. And I think you need to give the business, it's going to happen. So, and I think this is where IT and the business fall apart. They've always been, again, they've been pushed down a couple of layers. They're not partners for the business anymore. They simply are, but they're really not. They're really trying to control the estate, the technical estate, which again, it's no small task. And you have all these, you're getting security attacks from, you know, many different angles from different places from all across the world. You're getting tax counseling. You're trying to protect the business, and rightly so. You should do that. And there's a big role for that. But there's also a big role to enable a business user to operate at the speed of business. And that's not how it's set up today. And I think this is going to push it further in that direction because now, really for the first time, especially once agentic computing really takes off, for business users to do these functions themselves without the need for IT. And that is not something you could shut down. I think that is something you need to embrace, recognize it's going to happen, and be prepared for it and set yourself up for it because it's just a matter of time. Because like you and traders and end users would build applications and or deploy applications that they found other places because they provided a real function for them that IT internally was not doing.
Right,
And
right.
again, they're the ones dealing with reality at the end of the day. They're the ones that are the business folks are the ones that are providing function, they're keeping the company going, they're doing all this stuff. You need to enable them, not hold them back.
Right. And look, I think you and I also both agree that there will always be certain mission critical applications that should only be developed and maintained and owned by very, very specialized, highly qualified
100%.
software engineers, right? But
Yes.
generally, the lion's share of day to day computer assisted work that happens in an organization doesn't fall into that category of specialized, sensitive, mission critical applications, right? So,
No, no, it doesn't. And it needs to be enabled. And I think there's a lot of fear factor involved in that. And there's a lot of, I'm sure, CIOs going and gnashing their teeth, like, how are we going to deal with this? But I think it's happening. It's going to happen. It's just you can't maintain control over this.
yeah.
And
And
so
so I have to ask now. I just have to ask. We didn't plan this. What do you think? Have you followed the I don't know. It's underselling it to call it a dialogue. The torrent of people commenting on the concept of vibe coding in the last week. Have you had a chance to catch up on vibe coding?
I have not had a chance to catch up on vibe coding. It's kind of hit me, in my peripheral vision a little bit, but I haven't had a chance to dive into this whole concept of vibe coding and honestly
So
what they're even
because
talking about. So please tell
it
me.
is exactly what we're talking about here. It's so funny because the idea behind vibe coding is use a coding assistant, many of which actually do have some agentic capabilities. They're not fully agentized, but
Yeah.
Cursor.ai I would qualify and
Hmm.
Replit and others. So use one of these coding facilities, and rather than going into it as I'm going to write software. You just basically start with a lengthy description of what you want. And sometimes this could be a full page or 2 pages of text where you're describing the application and its behavior. And you stop making decisions and you just let the coding model create something.
Right.
And when it doesn't work, you just copy and paste the error code and say, and don't even say, please fix this. And you just sort of like take a very passive role
Right.
in letting this. And so it's interesting because like you're almost acting as an agent in the broader ecosystem because you're not really doing the human thinking. You're just sort of like letting the system go and you're feeding it a few
Hmm.
bits of input and you're just letting it go and see what happens.
So,
And
so I,
you're
God, I'm sorry.
surrendering control over the software
Yes.
product that gets generated by just letting it go. Very interesting approach.
So I know we're out of time, but I know one more minute and then we can wrap this up. But just a little story, precisely, and I wasn't even putting the connection that was vibe coding. So my son, who is an engineer, and he said basically, This actually makes him feel more like an engineer than just coding. Because coding is, look, if you've done coding extensively, it can be a boring drudgery thing. You're doing a lot of functions that are just not hard to do. Where he would write very highly detailed specifications, spend a couple of days doing very detailed specifications, what he's looking to do, and it is an engineering type of a document, but still written in plain English. And he would give this to either, there are a number of tools out there that he'll actually use to generate what in essence is 6 9 months worth of code if we had to develop it,
Right.
and modify the document and refeed it in if things aren't exactly as he wants. That is, to me, you're not, and there are certain models are better than others at generating code that
Right.
works. That is the future, hands down. That is the
Yeah.
future.
And it sounds like, I mean, if I don't want to put words in his mouth, but it sounds like that enables you to be more of an engineer and less of a technician or less of a mechanic, right?
Yes, 100%, hundred
It's
percent.
really interesting. Really
So on
interesting.
that note, because I know we're about out of time, and you and I can keep talking for another 2 hours. Um,
I've got some vibing and coding to do.
yes, we both do. I like to thank everybody once again for listening to Call Me Data. Again, David, always a pleasure. And feedback welcome. Text, carrier pigeon, whatever it may be, you can happily get it to us. And if you want what kind of shirt you'd like to see on David next week, comments are certainly
Well,
welcome.
I was also going to say I think I like the cardigan. I think it's a good look. If you agree, let Peter know that you think he should keep doing it. Although it is about to be summer, so you might have to switch it up a little
Yeah,
bit for
I know.
summer. But
I can't go this much longer.
yeah,
If you pull it out
yeah,
today, why not? I like to I'll make you look a little bit intelligent.
awesome.
All
All right,
right, David.
thanks again,
Thank you.
Peter. We'll see you soon. Bye.
Always a pleasure. Bye, bye.